outside, 2 million drunk Bostonians are getting ready to sing Auld Lang Syne out of tune. I sit there in my easy chair, looking at the clouds, orange with celebration. I wonder if you're out there. Hey! The ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night. And I slip on it every time. Pop open the third bottle of bubbly. Yeah, and I take that bottle of champagne, go into the kitchen, stand in front of the kitchen window, and I take all my clothes off, take that bottle of champagne, and I pour it on my head, feel a cascade through my hair and across my chest, and the phone rings. And it's my mother. And she says, "Hi, honey, how's Boston?" And I stand there all alone on New Year's Eve, buck naked, drenched in champagne, looking at a bunch of strangers, looking at them, looking at me, looking at them, and I say, "Oh, fine, Mom. How's Washington? Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night, and I slip on it every time. Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night, and I slip on it every time, yeah." So I guess the party line is I followed you up here. Well, I don't know about that. Mainly because knowing about that would involve knowing about some pathetic, ridiculous, and absolutely true things about myself. I'd rather not admit to right now. I woke up at 3 a.m. with the radio on, that Gladys Knight and the Pip song on, about how she'd rather live in his world with him than live in her own world alone. And I laid there, head spinning, trying to fall asleep, and I thought to myself, "Oh, Gladys, girl, I love you, but oh, get a life! Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night, and I slip on it every time. Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night, and I slip on it every time. Time, time, time. Time, time, time. Time, time, time. Time, time, time. Open a bottle of bubbly. Yeah. Here's to another goddamn new year. And outside, 2 million drunk Bostonians are getting ready to sing Auld Lang Syne out of tune. I sit there in my easy chair, looking at the clouds, orange with celebration. I wonder if you're out there. Hey! The ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light. Been day or night, and I slip on it every time. Pop open the third bottle of bubbly. Yeah, and I take that bottle of champagne, go into the kitchen, stand in front of the kitchen window, and I take all my clothes off, take that bottle of champagne, and I pour it on my head, feel a cascade through my hair and across my chest, and the phone rings. And it's my mother. And she says, "Hi, honey, how's Boston?" And I stand there all alone on New Year's Eve, buck naked, drenched in...
Year of the Depend Adult Undergarment. There is no jolly irony in Tiny Ewell's name. He is tiny, an elf-sized U.S. male. His feet barely reach the floor of the taxi. He is seated, being driven east into the grim three-decker districts of East Waterton, west of Boston proper. A rehabilitative staffer wearing custodial whites under a bombardier's jacket sits beside Tiny Ewell, big arms crossed and staring placid as a cow at the intricately creased back of the cabbie's neck. The window Tiny is next to has a sticker that thanks him in advance for not smoking. Tiny Ewell wears no winter gear over a jacket and tie that don't quite go together and stares out his window with unplacid intensity at the same district he grew up in. He normally takes involved routes to avoid Waterton. His jacket a 26S, his slacks a 26-24. His shirt, one of the shirts his wife had so considerably packed for him to bring into the hospital detox and hang on hangers that won't leave the rod. As with all Tiny Ewell's business shirts, only the front and cuffs are ironed. He wears size 6 Florsheim wingtips that gleam nicely except for one big incongruous scuff mark of white from where he'd kicked at his front door when he returned home just before dawn from an extremely important get-together with potential clients to find that his wife had the locks changed and filed a restraining order and would communicate with him only by notes passed through the mail slot below the white door's black brass. The brass had been painted black. Knocker. When Tiny leans down and wipes the scuff mark with a slim thumb, it only pales and smears. It is Tiny's first time out of happy slippers since his second day at the detox. They took away his Florheims after 24 abstinent hours had passed, and he started to perhaps DT a little. He kept noticing mice scurrying around his room, mice as in rodents, vermin, and when he lodged a complaint and demanded the room be fumigated at once and then begin running around, hunched and pounding with the heel of a handheld Florsheim at the mice, as they continued to ooze through the room's electrical outlets and scurry repulsively about. Eventually a gentle-faced nurse, flanked by large men in custodial whites, negotiated a trade-off shoes for Librium, predicting that the mild sedative would fumigate what really needed to be fumigated. They gave him slippers of green foam rubber with smiley faces embossed on the tops. The detox inpatients are encouraged to call these happy slippers. The staff refer to the footwear in private as piss catchers. It is Tiny Ewell's first day out of rubber slippers and ass-exposing detox pajamas and striped cotton robe in 2 weeks. The early November day is foggy and colorless. The sky and the street are the same color. The trees look skeletal. There's bright, wet, wadded litter all along the seams of street and curb. The houses are skinny, three-deckers mashed together, wharf gray with salt white trim, Madonnas in the yards, bow-legged dogs hurling themselves against the fencing. Some schoolboys in knee pads and scallycaps are playing street hockey on a passing school cement playground, except none of the boys seems to be moving. The trees' bony figures make spellcasting gestures in the wind as they pass. East Waterton is the obvious straight-line easement between St. Mel's Detox and the halfway houses Enfield, and Ewell's insurance is paying for the cab. With his small round shape and bit of white goatee and a violent flush that could pass for window at the rose window of the church next to the school playground where the boys are not playing. The rose window is not illuminated from either side. The man who for the last 3 days has been Tiny Ewell's roommate at St. Mel's Hospital's detoxification unit sits in a blue plastic straight-back chair in front of his and Ewell's room window's air conditioner, watching it. The air conditioner hums and gushes, and the man gazes with rapt intensity into its screen of horizontal vents. The air conditioner's cord is thick and white and leads into a 3-prong outlet with black heel marks on the wall around it. The November room is around 12 degrees centigrade. The man turns the air conditioner's dial from setting 4 to setting 5. The curtains above it shake and billow around the window. The man's face falls into and out of amused expressions as he watches the air conditioner. He sits in the blue chair with a trembling styrofoam cup of coffee and a paper plate of brownies, into which he taps ashes from the cigarettes whose smoke the air conditioner blows straight back over his head. The cigarette smoke is starting to pile up against the wall behind him and to ooze and run chill down the wall and form a sort of cloud bank near the floor. The man's raptly amused profile appears in the mirror on the wall beside the dresser the two impatients share. The man, like Tiny Ewell, has the rouge corpse look that attends detox from late-stage alcoholism. The man is in addition a burnt yellow beneath his flush from chronic hepatitis. The mirror he appears in is treated with shatterproof loose-side polymers. The man leans carefully forward with the plate of brownies in his lap and changes the setting on the air conditioner from 5 to 3, and then to 7, then 8, scanning the screen of gushing vents. He finally turns the selector's dial all the way around to 9. The air conditioner roars and blows his long hair straight back, and his beard blows back over his shoulder. Ashes fly and swirl around from his plate of brownies, plus crumbs, and his Rodney's tip glows cherry and gives sparks. He's deeply engaged by whatever he sees on 9. He gives Tiny Ewell the screaming meanies. Ewell has complained. He wears piss catchers, a striped cotton St. Mel's robe, and a pair of glasses missing one lens. He has been watching the air conditioner all day. His face produces the little smiles and grimaces of a person who's being thoroughly entertained. When the big black rehabilitative staff replaced Tiny Ewell in a taxi and then squeezed in and told the cabbie they wanted Unit 6 in the Enfield Marine VA Hospital complex just off Commonwealth Avenue in Enfield, the cabbie, whose photo was on the Massachusetts livery license taped to the glove compartment, the cabbie, looking back and down at little Tiny Ewell's neat white beard and ruddy complexion and sharp threads, had scratched under his scally cap and asked if he was sick or something. Tiny Ewell had said, "So it would seem." By mid-afternoon on 2 April YDAU, the Near Eastern medical attaché, his devout wife, the Saudi Prince Q, personal physician's personal assistant who'd been sent over to see why the medical attaché hadn't appeared at the Back Bay Hilton in the AM and then hadn't answered his beeper's page. The personal physician himself would come to see why his personal assistant hadn't come back. 2 embassy security guards with sidearms who'd been dispatched by a candididactic, hardly pissed-off Prince Q, and 2 neatly groomed Seventh-day Adventist pamphleteers who'd seen human heads through the living room window and found the front door unlocked and come in with all good spiritual intentions. All were watching the recursive loop. The medical attaché had rigged on the TP's viewer the night before, sitting and standing, very still and attentive, looking not one bit distressed or in any way displeased, even though the room smelled very bad indeed. 30 April, year of the dependent adult undergarment. He sat alone above the desert, redly backlit and framed in shale, watching very yellow payloaders crawl over the beaten dirt of some USA construction site several kilometers to the southeast. The outcropping's height allowed him, Maraf, to look out over most of USA area code 6026. His shadow did not yet reach the downtown regions of the city Tucson, not yet quite. Of sounds in the arid hush were only a faint and occasional hot wind, the blurred sound of the wings of sometimes an insect, some tentative trickling of loosened grit, and small stones moving farther down the upslope behind. And as well the sunset over the foothills and mountains behind him, such a difference from the watery and somehow sad spring sunsets of southwestern Quebec's Papineau regions where his wife had need of care. This, the sunset, more resembled an explosion. It took place above and behind him, and he turned some of the time to regard it. The sunset, was swollen and perfectly round and large, radiating knives of light when he squinted. It hung and trembled slightly like a viscous drop about to fall. It hung just above the peaks of the Tortolita foothills behind him, Maraf, and slowly was sinking. Maraf sat alone and blanket-lapped in his customized fauteuil de roulant on a kind of outcropping or shelf about halfway up, waiting, amusing himself with his shadow. As the lowering light from behind came at an angle more and more acute, Goethe's well-known Brückengespenst phenomenon enlarged and distended his seated shadow far out overland, so that the spokes of his chair's rear wheels cast over 2 whole counties below gigantic asterisk shadows, whose fine black radial lines he could cause to move by playing slightly with the wheel's rubber rims, and his head shadow brought to much of the suburb West Tucson premature dusk. He appeared to remain concentrated on his huge shadow play as gravel and then also breath sounded from the steep hillside back above him, grit and dirty stones cascading onto the outcropping and gushing past his chair and off the front lip, and then the unmistakable yelp of an individual's impact with a cactus somewhere up behind. But Maraf, he had all the time, without turning, watched the other man's clumsy sliding descent's own mammoth shadow, cast as far east as the Rincon Range, just past the city Tucson, and should see the shadow rush in west toward his own as unspecified surfaces M-Hugh steeply, descended, falling twice, and cursing in USA English, until the shadow collapsed nearly into Maraf's monstrous own. Another yelp took place as the unspecified services field operative's fall and slide, the last several meters, carried him upon his bottom down onto the outcropping and then nearly all the way out and off it, Maraf having to release the machine pistol under his blanket to grab Steepley's bare arm and halt his sliding. Steepley's skirt was pulled obscenely up and his hosiery full of runs and stubs of thorns. The operative sat at Maraf's feet, glowing redly in the backlight, legs hanging over the shelf's edge, breathing with difficulty. Maraf smiled and released the operative's arm. "Stealth becomes you," he said. Go shit in your chapeau," Steepley wheezed, bring up his legs to survey the hosiery's damage. They spoke, for the most part, USA English, when they met like this, covertly, in the field. M. Fautier had wished Maraf to require that they interface always in Quebecois French, as for a small symbolic concession to the AFR on the part of the Office of Unspecified Services, which the Quebecois separatist left referred to always as BSS, the Bureau de Service Sans Spécifique. Maraf watched the column of shadows spread again out east over the desert's floor as Steepley got a hand under himself and rose, a huge and well-fed figure tottering on heels. The 2 men sent together a strange Brückengespenst shadow out toward the city Tucson, a shadow round and radial at the base and jagged at the top, from Steeply's wig becoming uncombed in his descent. Steeply's gigantic prosthetic breasts pointed in wildly different directions now, one nearly at the empty sky. The matte curtain of sunset's true dusk shadow was moving itself very slowly in across the Rincons and Sonora Desert east of the city Tucson, still many kilometers from obscuring their own large shadow. But once Marat had committed not just to pretend to betray his assassins de fauteuil roulant in order to secure advanced medical care for the medical needs of his wife, but to in truth do this, betray, perfidiously, now pretending only to M. Fortier and his AFR superiors that he was merely pretending to feed some betraying information to BSS. Once this decision, Marat was without all power, served now at the pleasure of the power of Steeply and the BSS of Hugh Steeply. And now they spoke mostly the USA English of Steeply's preference. In fact, Steeply's Quebecois was better than Marat's English, but c'était la guerre, as one says. Marat sniffed slightly. Thus, so we now are both here? He wore a windbreaker and did not perspire. Steeply's eyes were luridly made up. The rear area of his dress was dirty. Some of his makeup had started to run. He was forming a type of salute to shade his eyes and looking upward behind them at what remained of the explosive and trembling sun. How in God's name did you get up here? Marat slowly shrugged. As usual, he appeared to Steeply as if he were half asleep. He ignored the question and said, only shrugging, My time is finite. Steeply had also with him a woman's handbag or purse. And the wife? He said, gazing upward as yet. How's the wife doing? Holding her own weight, thank you, Marat said. The tone of his voice betrayed nothing. And so thus what is it your officers believe they wish to know? Steeply tottered on a leg as he removed one shoe and poured from it grit. Nothing terribly surprising. A bit of razzle-dazzle up or northeast in your so-called ops area. Certainly you heard. Marat sniffed. A large odor of inexpensive and high-alcohol perfume came not from Steeply's person, but from his handbag, which failed to complement his shoes. Marat said, Dazzle? Yeah, as in a civilian-type individual receives a certain item. Don't tell me this is news to you guys. Not on Interlace Pulse, this item. Arrives via normal physical mail. We're sure you heard, Remy. A cartridge copy of a certain, let's call it between ourselves, the entertainment. As in the mail. Without warning or motive, out of the blue. Oh, from somewhere blue? The BSS operative had perspired also through his rouge, and his mascara had melted to become whorish. A person with no political value to anybody except that the Saudi Ministry of Entertainment made one the hell of a shrill stink. Oh, the medical attaché, the specialist of digesting you refer to? Marat shrugged again in the maddening francophone way that can mean several things. Your officers wish to ask, was the entertainment cartridge disseminated through our mechanisms? Don't let's waste your finite time, me old friend, Steeply said. The mischief happens to occur in metropolitan Boston. Postal codes route the package to the desert southwest, and we know your dissemination scheme's routing mechanism is proposed for somewhere between Phoenix and the border down there. Steeply had worked hard at feminizing his expressions and gesturing. It would be a bit starry-eyed of OUS not to think of your distinguished cell, no? Beneath Marat's windbreaker was a sports shirt whose breast pocket was filled with many pens. He said, Us? We don't have the information on even casualties from this blue dazzle you speak of. Steeply was trying to extract something stubborn from inside his other shoe. Upwards of 20, Remy. Out of commission altogether. The attaché and his wife. The wife, a Saudi citizen. 4 more raggers, all with embassy cards. Couple neighbors or something. The rest mostly police before word got to a level they could stop police from going in before they killed the power. Local police forces, gendarmes? The local constabulary. The minions of the law of the land. The local constabulary were, shall we say, unprepared for an entertainment like this. Steeply even removed and replaced his pumps in the upright, one on one leg, bringing other foot up behind his bottom way of a feminine USA woman. But he appeared huge and bloated as a woman, not merely unattractive, but inducing something like sexual despair. He said, "The attaché at diplomatic status, Remy. Mid-East, Saudi. Said to be close to minor members of the royal family." Maraf sniffed hard, as if congested of the nose. "Ah, puzzling," he said. "But also a compatriot of yours. Canadian citizenship, born in Ottawa, to Arab emigres. Visa lists a residence in Montreal. And so this without specificity wishes maybe to ask where there are the surface connections that makes the individuals not such a civilian unconnected. To ask of us, would the AFR wish to make of him the example?" Steeply was removing dirt from his bottom, squatting himself on the bottom. He stood more or less directly over Maraf. Maraf sniffed. "We have neither digestive medicals nor diplomatic entourages on any lists for action. You have personally seen AFR's initial lists, nor in particular Montreal civilians. We have, as one will say, larger seafood to cook." Steeply was looking out over the desert and city also as he swatted it himself. He seemed to have noticed the Gespenst phenomenon of his own shadow. Maraf, for some reason, pretended again to sniff the nose. The wind was moderate and constant and of about the temperature of a USA clothes dryer set on low. It made the shrill whistling sounds, also sounds of the blowing grit. Weeds of tumbling like enormous hairballs rolled off across the interstate highway of I-10 below. Their specular perspective, the redeeming light on vast and stone, and the oncoming curtain of dusk, the further elongation of their monstrous agnate shadows, all was almost mesmerizing. Neither man seemed able to look at anything but the vista below. Maraf could simultaneously speak in English and think in French. The desert was the tawny color of the hide of the lion. They're speaking without looking at one another, facing both the same direction. This gave their conversing an air of careless intimacy, as of old friends at the cartridge viewer together, or a long-married couple. Maraf thought this as he opened and closed his upheld hand, making over the city Tucson a huge and black blossom, open itself and close itself. And Steeply raised his bare arms and held them out and crossed them, maybe as if signaling for distant aid. This made X's and pedantic V's over much in the city of Tucson. "Still, Remy, but born in the hated by you Ottawa. The civilian attaché and connected to a major buyer of transgrid entertainment." And follow up out of the Boston offices reports possible indications of the victim's prior possible involvement with the widow of the auteur we both know was responsible for the entertainment in the first place, the samizdat. "Ooh, prior?" Steeply produced from his handbag Belgian cigarettes of a many millimeter and habitually female type. "Film director's wife taught out at Brandeis, where the victim done his residency. The husband was on board over at AEC, and different agencies' background checks indicated the wife was fucking just about everything with a pulse." With a slight pause of which Steeply could excel, particularly a Canadian pulse. "Involvement of sexuality is what you're meaning then, not politics?" Steeply said. "This wife herself a Quebecer, Remy, from Lillette County. Chief Tyne says 3 years spent on Ottawa's Personnes qui en doit list. There's such a thing as political sex." "I have said to you all we know. Civilians are as individual warnings to ONA and are not our desire. This is known by you." Maraf's eyes looked nearly closed. "And your teeth, they have become cockeyed, I will tell you. Services without specificity. They have given you ridiculous deeds, and now they point differently. Steeply looked down at himself. One of the false breasts, surely false. Surely they would not go as far as the hormonal, Maraf thought, nearly touched the chins of Steeply when his looking down produced his double chins. I was asked to secure personal verification is all, he said. My general sense at the office is the brass consider the whole incident a stumper. There are theories and counter-theories. There are even anti-theories posting error, mistaken identity, sick hoax. His shrugging with his hands on the prosthesis appeared not at all Gallic. Still, 23 human beings lost for all time. That be some hoax, no? Maraf sniffed. As to verify by our mutual M-Tyne, how'd you call him? Rod? A god? Rodney Tyne, Sr., Chief of Unspecified Services, acknowledged architect of ONAN and Continental Reconfiguration, who held the ear of the White House of USA and whose stenographer had long doubled as the stenographer comme jeune fille de vendredi of M. Duplessis, former assistant coordinator of the Pan-Canadian Resistance, and whose passionate, ill-disguised attachment, Tynes, to this double amanuensis, one Mademoiselle Luria Perec of Lamartine County, Lillette, Quebec, gave rise to these questions of the high-level loyalties of Tyne, whether he doubled for Quebec out of the love for Luria or tripled the loyalties, pretending only to divulge secrets while secretly maintaining his USA fealty against the pull of an irresistible love. It was said. Remy. It was clear that Steeply could not fix his breast's directions without pulling down severely his décolletage, which he was shy to do. He produced from his handbag sunglasses and put on the sunglasses. They were embellished with rhinestones and looked absurd. Rod the God. Maraf forced himself to say nothing of their appearance. Steeply tried with several matches to light a cigarette in the wind. The encroachment of true dusk began to erase his wig's chaotic shadow. Electric lights began to twinkle in the Rincon foothills east of the city. Steeply tried somewhat to cup his body around the match for shelter for the flame. It's a herd of feral hamsters, a major herd thundering across the yellow plains of the southern regions of the Great Concavity in what used to be Vermont, raising dust that forms a uremic-hued cloud with somatic shapes interpretable from as far away as Boston and Montreal. The herd is descended from two domestic hamsters set free by a Waterton, New York boy at the beginning of the experialist migration in the subsidized year of the Whopper. The boy now attends college in Champaign, Illinois, and has forgotten that his hamsters were named Ward and June. The noise of the herd is tornadic, locomotival. The expression on the hamsters' whiskered faces is businesslike and implacable. It's that implacable herd expression. They thunder eastward across pedal-furious terrain that today is fallow, denuded. To the east, dimmed by the fulvous cloud the hamsters send up, is the vivid, verdant, ragged outline of the annularly over-fertilized forests of what used to be central Maine. All these territories are now property of Canada. With respect to a herd of this size, please exercise a sort of common sense that, come to think of it, would keep your thinking man out of the southwest concavity anyway. Feral hamsters are not pets. They mean business. Wide berth advised. Carry nothing even remotely vegetable-ish if in the path of a feral herd. If in the path of such a herd, move quickly and calmly in a direction perpendicular to their own. If American north, not advisable. Move south, calmly and in all haste towards some border metropolis, Rome or Glen Falls or Beverly, say, or those bordered points between them at which the giant protective ATH-SCME fans atop the hugely convex protective walls of anodized lucite hold off the drooling and piss-collared bank of teratogenic concavity clouds and move the bank well back north away jaggedly over your protected head. The heavy-tongued English of Steeply was even more difficult to understand with a cigarette in the mouth. He said, "And you'll, of course, report this little interface of you and me right back to Fortier?" Marov shrugged. Sure." Steeply got it lit. He was a large and soft man, some type of brutal U.S. contact sport athlete now become fat. He appeared to Marov to look less like a woman than a twisted parody of womanhood. Electrolysis had caused patches of tiny red pimples along his jowls and upper lip. He also held his elbow out, the arm holding the match for lighting, which is how no woman lights a cigarette, who is used to breasts and keeps the lighting elbow in. Also steeply teetered ungracefully on his pump's heels on the stone's uneven surface. He never for a moment turned his back completely at Marov as he stood on the lip of the outcropping. And Marov had his chair's wheels clamps now locked down tight in a firm grip on the machine pistol's pebbled grip. Steeply's purse was small and glossy black, and the sunglasses he wore had womanly frames with small false jewels at the temples. Marov believed that something in Steeply enjoyed his grotesque appearance and craved the humiliation of the field disguises his BSS superiors requested of him. Steeply now looked at him in probability behind the dark glasses. "And also that I just right now asked you if you reported it, that you said bien sûr?" Marov's laugh had this misfortune to sound false and over-hearty, whether or not sincere. He made a moustache of his finger, pretending for some reason to stifle a need to sneeze. "You verify this because of why?" Steeply scratched under the hem of his blonde wig with stupidly dangerously the thumb of his hand that held the cigarette. "Well, are you already tripling, Remy, aren't you? Or would it be quadrupling? We know Fortier and the AFR know you're here with me right now." "But do my brothers on wheels know that you are knowing this, that they have sent me to pretend I double?" Marov's sidearm, a Sterling UL 35 9mm machine pistol with a Magna port silencer, did not have a safety. Its fat and textured of pebbles grip was hot from Marov's palm, and in turn caused Marov's palm to perspire beneath the blanket. From Steeply there merely was silence. Marov said, "Have I merely pretended to pretend to betray?" And the desert USA's light had become now sad. More than half the round sun gone behind the tortolitas. Only now the chair's wheels and Steeply's thick legs cast shadows below the dusk line, and these shadows were becoming squat and retreating back up toward the two men. Steeply did a brief pretend Charleston, playing with his legs' shadows. "Nothing personal, you know that. It's the obsessive caution. Who was it who once said we get paid to drive ourselves crazy? The caution thing? You guys and Tyne, your Duplessis, always suspected he tried to hold back on the information he passed sexually to Luria." Marov shrugged hard. "And abruptly M. Duplessis has now passed away from the life, under circumstances of almost ridiculous suspicion." Again with the false-sounding laugh. "An inept burglary. And grip, indeed." Both men were silent. Steeply's left arm had on it a nasty mesquite scratch, Marov could observe. Marov finally glanced at his watch. Its dial illuminated in his body's shadow. Both men's shadows were now climbing the steep incline, returning up to them. "Me, I think that we go about our affairs in a more simple manner than your BSS office. If M. Tyne's betrayal were incomplete, we of Quebec would be aware." "Because of Luria?" Marov pretended to fuss with his blanket, rearranging it. "But yes, the caution. Luria would be aware." Steeply stepped gingerly up to the edge and tossed out his cigarette stub. The wind caught the stub and it soared slightly upward from his hand, moving east. Both men were silent until the butt fell and hit the dark mountainside off below them, a tiny bloom of orange. Their silence then became contemplative. Something tight in the air between them loosened. Marav no longer felt the sun on his skull. Dusk settled about them. Steeply had found his triceps scratch and twisted the flesh of his arm to examine it, his rouged lips rounded with concern. Year of the Depend Adult Undergarment. Tuesday, 3 November, Enfield Tennis Academy, AM drills. Shower, eat, class, lab, class, eat, prescriptive grammar exam, lab, class, conditioning run, PM drills, play challenge, match, upper body circuits in weight room, sauna, shower, slump to locker room, floor with other players. To even realize what they're sitting there feeling is unhappiness, or to even feel it in the first place, 1,640 hours. The Commonwealth Building's male's locker room is full of clean upperclassmen in towels after PM matches, the players' hair wet, combed, and shining with barbicide. Pemulis uses the comb's big-toothed end to get that wide-furred look that kids from Austin favor. Hal's own hair tends to look wet-combed even when it's dry. So, Jim Troach says, looking around, so, what do you think? Pemulis lowers himself to the floor by the sinks, leaning up against the cabinet where they keep all the disinfectants. He has this way of looking warily to either side of him before he says anything. Was there like a central point to it all, Troach? The exam was talking about the syntax of Tolstoy's sentence, not about real unhappy families, Hal says quietly. John Wayne, as do most Canadians, lifts one leg slightly to fart, like the fart was some kind of task, standing at his locker, waiting for his feet to get dry enough to put on socks. There is a silence. Shower heads dribble on tile. Steam hangs. Distant, ghastly sounds from tea shocked over in one of the stalls of the showers. Everyone stares into the middle distance, stunned with fatigue. Michael Pemulis, who can stand about 10 seconds of communal silence tops, clears his throat deeply and sends a loogie up and back into the sink behind him. The plate mirrors caught part of this quivering fight. Hal sees. Hal closes his eyes. Tired, someone exhales. Ortho Stice and John and R. Wayne seem less fatigued than detached. They have the really top players' way of shutting the whole neural net down for brief periods, staring at the space they took up, hooded in silence, removed for a moment from the connectedness of all events. All right then, Troach says. Pop quiz, pop test question. Most crucial difference for Leith tomorrow between your historical broadcast TV set and a cartridge-capable TP. Disney R. Leith teaches ETA's History of Entertainment 1 and 2, as well as certain high-level esoteric optics things you needed permission of INS to get into. The cathode deluminescent panel, no cathode gun, no phosphenic screen, 2 to the screen's diagonal width and centimeters lines of resolution total. You mean a high-def viewer in general, or a specifically TP component viewer? No analogs, Struck says. No snow, no faint weird like ghostly double next to UHF images, no vertical roll when planes fly over. Analogs versus digitals. You're referring to broadcast as a network versus a TP, or network plus cable versus a TP? Did cable TV use analogs? What? Like pre-fiber phones? It's the digitals. Leith has that word he uses for the shift from analogs to digitals. That word he uses about 11 times an hour. What did pre-fiber phones use exactly? The old tin can and string principle. Seminal, he keeps saying it. Seminal, seminal, seminal. The biggest advance in home communication since the phone, he says. In home entertainment since the TV itself. Leith might say the right capable CD for entertainment. He's hard to pin down if you get him on entertainment qua entertainment. The Dizzles say use your own judgment, Pemulis says. Axford took it last year. He wants an argument made. He'll skewer you if you treat it like there's an obvious answer. Plus, there's the interlaced D-digitizer instead of an antenna with a TP, Jim Struck says, squeezing at something behind his ear. Graham, yard guard radar, is checking his underarm for more hair. Freer and Shaw might be asleep. Stice has pulled his towel slightly and is fingering the